The fire crackled in the hearth, spitting little sparks that danced up the chimney, and the room smelled like pine needles and cinnamon from the candles Camilla had lit earlier. Outside, snow fell thick and steady, blanketing the ground in a way that made everything look clean and perfect, like one of those Christmas cards you'd buy at the store. I sat on the couch, sipping coffee from a mug Luca had painted for me when he was 6, red and green swirls with Dad written in wobbly letters. It was Christmas morning, and the tree lights twinkled, reflecting off the ornaments we'd hung as a family just last week. Everything felt warm, cozy, right, until I caught that look in Camilla's eye. She was standing by the tree, holding a small box wrapped in shiny gold paper, tied with a red ribbon. She handed it to Isabel, her sister, who was perched on the arm of the recliner, her legs crossed like she owned the place. Camilla's smile was wide, but there was something sharp in it, something that didn't quite reach me. "We bought her a house. You'll understand someday," she said, her voice light, almost teasing. My jaw tightened so hard I felt my teeth grind together. "A house? We?" I didn't say a word, just stared at her, trying to figure out what she meant, what I'd missed. Luca, our son, was sprawled on the floor near the tree, surrounded by torn wrapping paper from the gifts he'd already opened, a new video game, a hoodie, socks he'd probably never wear. He looked up, his 8-year-old face bright with that easy grin of his, but he tilted his head, confused by the sudden quiet. I forced a smile for him, not wanting him to feel the tension coiling in my chest. Then Camilla handed him his last gift, an envelope, plain and white, nothing fancy. He ripped it open, eager, his fingers quick and clumsy. I watched his eyes move over the paper inside, and that smile of his, it just slid right off, like water spilling from a cup. His brow furrowed, and he looked up at me, then at his mom, then back at the paper. "What is this?" he asked, his voice small. Camilla laughed, a little too loud, and said, "It's a surprise, sweetie. You'll see." But I could tell he didn't like it, whatever it was. I reached out, ruffling his hair, trying to keep things normal, but my mind was spinning. A house for Isabel? What did that even mean? We hadn't talked about anything like that. I'd been working overtime at the factory for months, saving every extra penny for Luca's college fund, for our future, not for some gift to her sister. Isabel unwrapped her box, pulling out a set of keys that jingled in her hand, and she squealed, hugging Camilla like they'd just won the lottery. I sat there, coffee going cold in my hands, feeling like an outsider in my own living room. Luca folded the paper and tucked it back into the envelope, his shoulders slumping a little. He didn't say anything else, just stared at the fire, and I knew something had shifted, something big. I couldn't put my finger on it yet, but the air felt heavier, like the snow outside was pressing down on the house. Camilla caught my eye for a second, and that smug twinkle was still there, daring me to ask, daring me to ruin the moment. I didn't. Not then. I just swallowed it down, bitter as it was, and watched the flames dance, wondering how long I'd been missing the truth sitting right in front of me. The day went on. Laughter, more coffee, Luca playing with his new game. But that envelope sat on the coffee table like a brick, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was inside it was going to change everything. I wasn't wrong. Luca's hand was trembling a little when he passed me the envelope. The edges of it crumpled from where he'd gripped it too tight. I took it from him, my fingers brushing his, and I could feel the confusion radiating off him like heat from the fireplace still crackling behind us. The room was loud with Camilla and Isabel's chatter, glasses clinking, their laughter bouncing off the walls, but it all faded into a dull hum as I unfolded the paper inside. My eyes scanned the words, simple black ink on white, but each one hit me like a punch to the gut. It was a bank notice, a transfer of funds, Luca's college savings, every dime we'd scraped together over the years gone, moved into something called a family fund. I read it again, slower, hoping I'd misunderstood, but the numbers didn't lie. $18,000 shifted out of his account, just like that. My stomach dropped, heavy and sick, like I'd swallowed a stone. I looked up at Camilla, who was leaning over the kitchen counter now, pouring more wine for Isabel, her back to me like nothing was wrong. They were laughing about something, probably the house, that damn house she'd sprung on me like it was no big deal. I wanted to stand up, to yell, to demand answers, but my legs felt glued to the couch, and my voice stuck in my throat. Luca was watching me, his brown eyes wide, waiting for me to say something, to fix it. "Dad?" he said, quiet, unsure. I forced a nod, folding the paper back up, my hands shaking now too. It's okay, buddy. I lied, because what else could I say? He didn't need to see me lose it, not on Christmas. But inside, I was boiling. Betrayal doesn't always come with a fight or a slammed door. It can be quiet, casual, like this. Camilla didn't even look at me, didn't check to see how I'd take it. She just kept smiling, clinking her glass against Isabel's, like she hadn't just ripped Luca's future out from under him. I sat there, the envelope burning a hole in my lap, and started piecing it together. This wasn't just about the house. It wasn't a one-time thing. I thought back to the times she'd brushed off my questions about money, little comments about helping Isabel out, buying her a car when hers broke down, paying for her trips because she needed a break. I let it slide, told myself it was fine, that family helps family. But this was different. This was Luca's money, his chance at college, his shot at something better than the factory life I'd been stuck in. And she'd taken it, handed it over to her sister without even asking me. The room spun a little, the pine smell turning sour in my nose. I glanced at Luca again. He'd gone back to his video game, but his heart wasn't in it, his thumbs moving slow over the controller. I wanted to grab Camilla, pull her aside, make her explain, but she was too busy playing the perfect sister, the generous one. Isabel was twirling those keys around her finger, talking about paint colors for her new place, and I realized they'd planned this together. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment gift. It was calculated, and I'd been left out of it. My chest tightened, anger mixing with something else, shame, maybe, for not seeing it sooner. I trusted her, trusted us, and now here I was, holding proof she didn't care what I thought. The fire popped, sending another spark up the chimney, and I stared at it, letting the heat dry the sweat on my palms. This wasn't just a cut. It was a wound, deep and raw, and it wasn't going to heal on its own. I didn't say anything that day, didn't ruin the holiday for Luca. But as I watched Camilla laugh, so sure of herself, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. This was a pattern, one I'd been too blind or too tired to notice. Not anymore. The next few days after Christmas were quiet, too quiet, like the snow outside had muffled everything's sound, feeling, even the truth I couldn't stop thinking about. I sat at the kitchen table late at night. After Luca was asleep and Camilla was in bed, the house dark except for the glow of the lamp above me. My coffee was cold, but I didn't care. I just kept staring at that envelope, still sitting where I'd left it on the counter. It was like a ghost now, haunting me, daring me to open it again. I didn't need to. I knew what it said, but my mind wouldn't let it go, wouldn't let me rest. I started remembering things, little moments that hadn't seemed like much at the time but now stuck out like cracks in the wall. The way Camilla would shrug when I asked about our joint account, saying, "Oh, I moved some money around, no big deal." Or how she'd come home with stories about Isabel, new clothes, a weekend getaway, always something, and wave it off with, "She's family, you know how it is." I'd nod, tell myself it was fine, that I was being petty for even wondering. But now those memories didn't feel small anymore. They felt like pieces of something bigger, something I'd ignored because it was easier to keep the peace. I got up, restless, and paced the kitchen, my socks silent on the cold tile. I thought about Luca, how he looked at me when he handed me that letter, like I was supposed to have the answers. He was family too, wasn't he? More than Isabel, more than anyone. So why did it always feel like he and me came second? I stopped by the sink, staring out the window at the snow-covered yard, and that's when it hit me. I wasn't imagining this. It wasn't just a feeling. I turned, grabbed my laptop from the living room, and started digging. I logged into our bank account, scrolling through months of statements, my heart pounding louder with every click. There they were, withdrawals I hadn't noticed, transfers labeled miscellaneous or family expenses, amounts that didn't add up to anything I'd spent. Hundreds here, 1,000 there, all trickling away. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was tired, seeing things wrong, but the numbers stayed the same. Then I found it, a second mortgage on our house, listed in fine print at the bottom of a statement from last year. My name was on it, but I'd never signed a damn thing. My breath caught, sharp and tight in my chest. I stood up, too fast, the chair scraping the floor, and went to the laundry room. I don't know why, I just needed to move, to do something. That's where I saw it, a corner of a checkbook sticking out from under a pile of towels. I pulled it free, my hand shaking, and flipped it open. My name was on every check, printed neat and official, but the handwriting filling them out? Not mine. Slanted, loopy, Camilla's. Payments to Isabel, to utility companies I didn't recognize, to a furniture store we'd never shopped at. I sank onto the dryer, the checkbook heavy in my lap, and stared at it. This wasn't just carelessness. This was deliberate. She'd been taking from us, me, Luca, our life, and funneling it to her sister, all while I worked doubles at the factory, thinking we were building something together. I thought about confronting her right then, storming upstairs, waking her up, but my legs wouldn't move. I just sat there, the hum of the house around me, feeling like a fool. The wallpaper in the laundry room was peeling at the edges, a floral pattern we'd picked out when we moved in, and I stared at it, seeing the cracks I'd missed in us too. Patterns everywhere, if you knew where to look. And now that I'd seen them, I couldn't unsee them. The cold bit at my knuckles as I stood outside the bank the next morning, my breath fogging in the January air. I'd barely slept, the checkbook and those bank statements burning holes in my brain all night. Camilla was still asleep when I left, Luca at a friend's house for the day, so I had time to figure out just how deep this mess went. The bank was quiet, just a teller sipping coffee and an old guy at the counter arguing about a fee. I walked up, my boots squeaking on the polished floor, and asked for every statement we had, going back 5 years. The teller raised an eyebrow but didn't argue, just clicked away at her computer and handed me a stack of papers thicker than I'd expected. I took them to a corner table, sat down, and started reading. At first, it was just more of the same, small withdrawals, transfers I couldn't explain, but then it got worse. Loans, plural, opened in my name. Some paid off, some still active. My signature was on them, or at least something that looked like it, but I'd never sat in an office signing anything like that. My hands went clammy, the papers crinkling as I gripped them too hard. I flipped further, and there it was, Luca's name, tied to a savings account that wasn't his college fund, drained months ago and funneled into that family fund from the envelope. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, trying to breathe through the anger choking me. She hadn't just taken from me. She'd used our son, too. I thought about her smug grin on Christmas, the way she'd said, "You'll understand someday." Like I was too dumb to get it now. It wasn't about understanding. It was about favoritism, plain and simple. Everything was for Isabel. Always had been. I remembered the car she'd needed, the trips, the excuses, and now this. Loans and forged signatures to prop up her sister's life, while ours got hollowed out. I wanted to scream, to flip the table and let the whole bank hear it, but I didn't. I just sat there, the papers spread out like a map of betrayal, and let it sink in. This wasn't survival for Camilla. She wasn't desperate, wasn't starving. She was choosing Isabel over us, over and over, and now Luca's future was collateral damage. I gathered the statements, stuffed them into my coat, and left, the cold air hitting me like a slap as I stepped outside. I drove home slow, my mind racing faster than the truck. I couldn't just confront her, not yet. She'd twist it, cry, make me the bad guy, and I'd have nothing solid to stand on. No, I needed more. I needed a plan. When I got back, the house was still quiet, Camilla's car gone, probably off with Isabel, celebrating her new house. I went to my desk in the garage, the one place she never bothered with, and spread the papers out again. I started writing it down, dates, amounts, account numbers, making a list of every lie I could prove. My pen scratched loud in the silence, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. I thought about Luca, how he'd looked at me that Christmas morning, trusting me to make sense of it. I hadn't then, but I would now. I wasn't going to let this slide, not anymore. I'd been the guy who nodded, who worked hard and kept quiet, but that guy was gone. I didn't know what came next, divorce, lawyers, cops maybe, but I knew I wasn't stopping here. I folded the list, tucked it into my pocket, and sat back, staring at the tools hanging on the wall. They were mine, bought with my money, my sweat. Just like this house, this life. And I'd be damned if I let her steal it all away without a fight. The garage felt colder than usual that afternoon, even with the heater humming in the corner, as I sat there staring at the pile of bank statements and my scribbled list. My head was a mess, but I couldn't just sit still anymore. I had to do something, anything, to get ahead of this. I grabbed my phone and called Caleb, my oldest friend, the guy who'd known me since we were kids sneaking beers behind the school gym. He was an estate lawyer now, sharp as a tack, and the one person I trusted to see through Camilla's bullshit. He picked up on the second ring, his voice gravelly but warm. "Hey, man, what's up?" I didn't waste time. "I need your help. It's bad." I told him everything. The envelope, the loans, the forged signatures, the house for Isabel. He didn't interrupt, just listened, and when I finished, he let out a low whistle. She's been playing you like a fiddle? Huh? All right. Bring what you've got. We'll figure it out. An hour later, I was at his office, a small place downtown with mismatched chairs and a coffee pot that looked older than me. I dumped the papers on his desk, and he started flipping through them, his glasses sliding down his nose. This is a goldmine of fraud, he said, tapping a loan document. And sloppy, too. She didn't even try to hide it. We dug in, tracing the money like detectives in some crime show. The house deed for Isabel's new place? Half of it was funded by a loan in my name, taken out 6 months ago. I hadn't seen a single paper about it, hadn't signed anything, but there was my name, clear as day. Caleb shook his head, muttering, unbelievable. Then he found something worse, the lake house, the one my granddad built with his own hands, the place where I'd taught Luca to fish. It was leveraged, mortgaged not once but 3 times over the years, all without me knowing. The money? Tied to Isabel's bakery, a failing little shop she'd opened 2 years back that never made a profit. Camilla had poured our savings into it. Then the house loans, trying to keep it afloat. They almost lost it, Caleb said, pointing at a foreclosure notice that had been dodged by a last-minute payment, another loan, another forgery. I felt sick, my stomach twisting so hard I thought I'd puke right there on his desk. That lake house wasn't just wood and nails, it was my history, my family's roots, and she'd gambled it away for her sister's pipe dream. I leaned back in the chair, rubbing my face with both hands, trying to breathe. How did I not see this? I said, more to myself than him. Caleb shrugged, tossing a pin onto the pile. You trusted her. That's not a crime. She's the one who screwed up here. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. We can fight this, undo the loans, maybe even press charges. But we need more. Let's check the titles, the deeds, everything. We spent hours there, him on his laptop pulling records, me calling banks and pretending I'd forgotten details to get copies of signatures. Every call, every document, peeled back another layer of the truth. Camilla hadn't just taken money, she'd taken our security, our memories, and wrapped them up in a bow for Isabel. By the time we finished, it was dark outside, the street lights buzzing through the window. Caleb handed me a folder, thick with proof. This is enough to start, he said. But what do you want to do with it? I didn't answer right away. I just sat there, holding the folder, feeling its weight. I wanted to storm home, shove it in her face, watch her squirm. But that wouldn't fix it, not yet. I need to think, I said finally, standing up. He nodded, clapping me on the shoulder. You've got time. Just don't let her know you're onto her. I drove home slow, the folder on the seat beside me, the lake house on my mind. I wasn't unwrapping presents this time. I was unwrapping the truth, and it was uglier than I'd ever imagined. The next few weeks were a blur of pretending, smiling at Camilla over breakfast, nodding when she talked about her day, acting like nothing was wrong while my blood boiled under the surface. I kept the folder Caleb gave me hidden in the garage, locked in an old toolbox she'd never touch. Every night, I'd sit out there, rereading the papers, planning my next move. I wasn't just mad anymore. I was done being the guy who let things slide. She'd taken too much, and I wasn't going to let her take more. Then she announced the family brunch at the lake house, her voice all chipper as she stirred oatmeal one morning. It'll be fun, she said, like it was her idea, her place. Isabel's dying to see it again. I just sipped my coffee, watching her, saying nothing. Inside, I was grinning, not because I was happy, but because I knew something she didn't. I'd been busy. Caleb and I had set up a holding company, quiet and legal, and used my factory savings, money she didn't know I'd stashed, to buy the lake house outright. The mortgages, the debt, all that mess she'd made, paid off, wiped clean, and the title transferred to my name alone. She thought she still had control, but she didn't. I'd stepped out of her game. The day of the brunch came fast, early spring, the snow gone, the lake glinting under a weak sun. I drove up with Luca in the truck, him quiet in the passenger seat, fiddling with his phone. He'd been quieter since Christmas, like he sensed the cracks even if he didn't know the details. Camilla and Isabel were already there when we arrived, unloading trays of food from her car, laughing like nothing had changed. I got out, grabbed a string of lights from the truck bed, and started hanging them along the porch railing, my hands steady even as my heart thumped. Camilla waved me over, all smiles. Help Isabel with the chairs, will you? She said, like I was still her errand boy. I nodded, played along, carried folding chairs from the shed while Isabel strutted around, pointing at the dock, the trees, calling it hers. We should repaint the siding, she said, hands on her hips. Maybe add a deck out back. Camilla handed her a stack of renovation plans, grinning like she was passing a crown. "We'll figure it out," she said, glancing at me for a second, daring me to argue. I didn't. I just kept hanging lights, watching them, letting them dig their own hole. The brunch went on, cousins, aunts, a few neighbors, all eating quiche and drinking mimosas, the air full of chatter. I sat on the porch steps, picking at a plate of fruit, listening as Camilla bragged about our plans for the place. Lucas stayed close, kicking a rock around the yard, avoiding his mom and aunt. I could tell he didn't like it here anymore, not like he used to. The day dragged, but I waited, patient, letting them think they'd won. When the sun started dipping, people trickling out, I made my move. Camilla was inside, cleaning up, and Isabel was still wandering the property, sketching ideas on a napkin. I went to the truck, pulled out a copy of the new deed, my name, no liens, no mortgages, and tucked it into my jacket. I didn't show it, didn't say a word. Not yet. I just walked back, leaned against the porch rail, and watched them. Camilla came out, wiping her hands on a towel, and said, "Good day, huh?" I nodded slow. "Yeah, real good." She didn't catch the edge in my voice, didn't see the shift. Isabel called over, "Next time, we'll do a barbecue," and I almost laughed. There wouldn't be a next time, not for them. I'd taken it back, quiet as a shadow, and they had no idea. The lake house was mine now, free and clear, and I wasn't the man in the background anymore. I'd staged my own coup, and they'd never see it coming. A year rolled by fast, and there I was again, sitting by the fire on Christmas morning, the same crackle and pop filling the quiet of the lake house. The air smelled of wood smoke and coffee, no cinnamon this time. Camilla's touch was gone from the place. Lucas sat next to me on the old leather couch, his legs stretched out, a little taller now, his face harder, wiser in a way I wished he didn't have to be. The tree was smaller this year, just a scrappy pine we'd cut down ourselves from the backwoods, decorated with the same ornaments, but none of the fuss. It was simpler, cleaner, ours. Camilla bustled in from the kitchen, carrying a tray of mugs, hot chocolate for Luca, coffee for me, and set it down with a smile that didn't quite fit anymore. Isabel was there too, perched on a chair by the window, her hair pulled back tight, looking out at the lake like she still owned a piece of it. They'd driven up together, invited themselves for the holiday, and I'd let them, not because I wanted to, but because I had something to say. Camilla handed Isabel a gift first, a small box with a designer bracelet inside, silver and shiny, probably expensive. Isabel cooed over it, slipping it on her wrist, and Camilla beamed, saying, "We love you, you know that." I watched, sipping my coffee, feeling the heat of the mug against my palms. Then she turned to Luca, her smile softening, and handed him a wrapped package, a book, some sci-fi thing he'd probably like. "You'll understand someday," she said, her voice light, that same damn line she'd used a year ago. It hit me like a spark, and I was done waiting. I stood up, slow and deliberate, setting my mug on the table. Luca looked up at me, curious, and I reached into my coat pocket, pulling out a flat, sealed envelope. I handed it to him, my eyes steady on his. "Open it," I said, my voice calm but firm. He tore it open, slower than last time, cautious now, and pulled out the papers inside. His eyes scanned them, deed documents, the lake house title, his name listed as co-owner right next to mine. His mouth opened a little, then closed, and he looked up at me, a question in his face. I nodded, just once, and turned to Camilla. She was frowning, her head tilted. "What is this?" she asked, her tone sharp, like she already knew she wouldn't like the answer. I met her gaze, unflinching. "Justice," I said, letting the word hang there, heavy and final. Her face shifted, confusion first, then panic creeping in, her eyes darting to Isabel, then back to me. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice rising a little. I didn't yell, didn't need to. I just pulled out another copy of the deed from my pocket and held it up. "This place is ours now, mine and Lucas. No more loans, no more lies. It's done." She stared at me, her mouth working like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Isabel stood up, the bracelet glinting on her wrist, and said, "You can't do that. It's family property." I turned to her, slow, and said, "Not anymore. You don't get to decide what's family." Luca was still holding the envelope, his fingers tight around it, and I could see the gears turning in his head, piecing it together. Camilla stepped closer, her hands clenched. "This is ridiculous. You're overreacting," she snapped. I didn't flinch. Overreacting? After the mortgages, the forgeries, the money you took from him. I nodded at Luca. You don't get to play that card anymore. The room went quiet, the fire snapping in the silence. Luca stood up beside me, not saying a word, just standing there, and that was enough. Camilla's eyes flickered between us, and for the first time, I saw her falter. She didn't have the upper hand anymore, and she knew it. I'd taken it back. Not with a fight, but with the truth, laid out plain and simple. The fire was still going strong as the silence stretched out after that moment, the logs popping like little explosions in the quiet. Camilla stood there, her face twisting from shock to something harder, her hands balled into fists at her sides. I could see her trying to find a way out, a way to turn it back on me, and sure enough, she did. You're betraying me, she said, her voice low and sharp, like a knife she was testing the edge of. After everything I've done for this family, you're making me the villain? I almost laughed, but it stuck in my throat, bitter and dry. I set the deed copy down on the coffee table, slow and deliberate, and pulled out the folder from my coat, the one Caleb and I had built, stuffed with every piece of evidence we'd found. I opened it, spreading the papers out like a hand of cards. Betrayal, I said, keeping my voice even. Let's talk about that. I pointed at the first document, a loan statement, my name forged in her loopy handwriting. This is from 2 years ago, 50 grand I never signed for. Went straight to Isabel's bakery. I slid another paper forward, a bank transfer. This is Luca's college fund, emptied out last spring, before the house gift even happened. I kept going, laying out the second mortgage on the lake house, the third, the foreclosure notice they'd barely dodged. Camilla's eyes flicked over them, fast, like she could make them disappear if she didn't look too long. Isabel stepped closer, her face pale now, the bracelet dangling loose on her wrist. This is crazy, she said, her voice shaky. We didn't mean to hurt anyone. It wasn't like that. I turned to her, steady. You didn't mean to? Then why's my name on every loan? Why's my son's future gone? I nodded at Luca, who was standing by the couch, arms crossed tight over his chest, his jaw set. He didn't say anything, just watched, taking it all in. Camilla threw her hands up, pacing now. It wasn't that much money. I was helping her. She's been through so much. You know that. I didn't think it'd be a big deal. I stared at her, feeling the weight of every excuse she'd ever made. Not a big deal? I said, my voice rising for the first time. You took everything, our savings, our house, his chance at college, and gave it to her. You don't get to call that small. I pointed at the papers again. And you lied, forged my name, kept it secret. That's not help. That's theft. She stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing. You're blowing this out of proportion. We're family. I did it for us. I shook my head, slow. No, you did it for her. You forgot who your real family was. Lucas shifted beside me, his sneakers scuffing the floor, and I glanced at him. His face was hard, his eyes locked on his mom, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. I could feel the hurt radiating off him, the years of being pushed aside finally clicking into place. Camilla saw it too, and her shoulders slumped a little, like the fight was leaking out of her. Isabel sank back into her chair, her hands twisting in her lap, the napkin with her renovation sketches crumpled on the floor. I didn't know it was this bad, she muttered, but I didn't buy it. Not for a second. She'd taken the money, the house, the gifts, and never asked where it came from. The room felt heavy, the air thick with everything laid bare. Camilla crossed her arms, staring at me like I was the one who'd broken something. So what now? She said, her voice flat. You kick us out? Ruin everything. I leaned back against the wall, the folder empty now, its contents scattered across the table. I'm not ruining anything, I said. You built these ruins yourself. I'm just showing you the wreckage. The fire crackled again, the only sound left, and I watched them both, Camilla defiant, Isabel shrinking, knowing this was the end of pretending. Lucas stayed by my side, silent, solid, and that was all I needed to know I'd done right. The days after that Christmas showdown felt like a storm had passed. Everything was still, quiet, but you could see the mess left behind. Camilla didn't stick around long after I laid out the papers. She didn't slam doors or scream like I half expected. She just grabbed her coat, muttered something about needing space, and walked out with Isabel trailing behind her. The lake house door clicked shut, soft but final, and I stood there, watching through the window as their car headlights cut through the dark and disappeared down the road. Luca was still on the couch, the deed envelope in his hands, turning it over and over like he wasn't sure it was real. I sat down next to him, the leather creaking under me, and for a while, we didn't say anything, just listened to the fire die down to embers. "You okay?" I asked finally, my voice rough from the day. He nodded, slow, his eyes on the floor. "Yeah, just weird, you know." I knew. Weird didn't even cover it. His mom walking out, the truth about all those years spilling out like a busted pipe. I put a hand on his shoulder, solid and warm, and said, "We'll figure it out. Together." He looked up at me then, a small nod back, and that was enough. The next morning, I woke up early, the lake house quiet except for the wind rattling the windows. Camilla's stuff was still there, clothes in the closet, a half-empty coffee cup on the counter, but it didn't feel like hers anymore. I made breakfast, eggs and toast, and Luca shuffled in, hair messy, still in his pajamas. We ate at the table, not talking much, but it wasn't awkward. It was healing, like the silence was stitching us back together. She called later that day, her voice tight on the phone. "I'm staying with Isabel for a while," she said. No apology, no explanation, just fact. "Fine," I said and hung up. I didn't chase her, didn't beg her to come back. I was done with that. Over the next few weeks, she came by once to pack a suitcase, her movements quick, her eyes avoiding mine. Isabel hovered by the car, not stepping inside, like she knew she wasn't welcome. They left again, and the house felt lighter, the air cleaner. Luca and I started rebuilding, not just the place, but us. We painted the living room, a fresh blue that covered the old floral wallpaper, the one I'd stared at when I found that checkbook. It felt good, rolling the paint on, watching the past disappear under each stroke. Luca picked out new curtains, simple gray ones, and we hung them together, laughing when I dropped a rod on my foot. The lake house changed. It wasn't the showpiece Camilla had tried to make it, all leveraged and fake. It was ours, real, smelling of fresh paint and the coffee we brewed every morning. We kept what mattered, the old couch, the fishing poles, the photos of us by the lake, and let go of the rest. Her fancy dishes? Donated. Isabel's renovation sketches? Trash. One night, Luca and I sat on the porch, the lake dark and still in front of us, a couple of beers between us. His first, a rite of passage I figured he'd earned. "You think she'll come back?" he asked, his voice low, staring at the water. I took a sip, the cold bottle sweating in my hand. "Maybe, but it won't be the same." He nodded, like he'd already worked that out. "I don't want her to, not like before." I looked at him, proud and sad at the same time. "Me neither," I said, and we clinked our bottles, the sound sharp in the quiet. The healing wasn't fast. There were still nights I'd wake up angry, still days Luca would go quiet, but it was real. The lake house stopped being a symbol of her lies and became something new, ours, reclaimed. We didn't need her to fill it. We had each other, and that was enough. Years slipped by like water over the lake's edge, smooth and steady, and the lake house stood there through it all, quiet and strong. I was older now, gray creeping into my beard, my hands rougher from years of fixing up the place. New shingles on the roof, a rebuilt dock Luca and I hammered together one summer. The calls from Camilla had slowed to a trickle, then stopped. First it was every few months, then once a year, then nothing but the occasional email, polite and distant, like a stranger checking in. "Hope you're well," she'd write. No mention of the past, no apology, just words that meant less every time. Isabel had moved somewhere down south, started over with a new shop or something. I didn't follow, didn't care to. My world was here, with Luca, and that was all I needed to keep track of. He'd grown up fast, finished high school, went to college on a scholarship we'd scraped together, no thanks to that old family fund. Now he was in grad school, studying engineering, building things like his granddad used to. He'd come back to the lake house on breaks, his truck rumbling up the drive, and we'd sit by the water, fishing or just talking, the way we learned after everything fell apart. The house itself had changed too, not big, flashy changes, but the kind that settle in over time. The paint we'd put up held strong. The curtains Luca picked still hung in the windows, faded but sturdy. We'd added a fire pit out back, a circle of stones where we'd sit on cool nights, the flames dancing while we talked about his classes, my shifts at the factory, or nothing at all. It was peaceful, a kind of quiet I hadn't known I needed until I had it. I didn't think about revenge anymore, didn't need Camilla or Isabel to hurt, Didn't need them to pay in some dramatic way. The truth being out was enough. Laid bare that Christmas years ago, and I'd let it go after that. I'd stopped waiting for them to see me, to hear me, because I didn't need their eyes or their ears anymore. I saw myself, working hard, raising Luca, keeping this place alive, and that was plenty. One spring day, Luca came up for the weekend, his hair longer now, a grin on his face as he hauled a cooler from his truck. Brought some fish to grill, he said, and we set up by the pit, the sun warm on our backs. I watched him skewer the fillets, his hand steady, and felt a swell in my chest, pride, yeah, but something deeper too. You ever think about her? He asked, out of nowhere, poking at the fire. I didn't have to ask who. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking under me. Sometimes. Not much. He nodded, flipping the fish, the sizzle filling the air. Me neither. Just wondered. We ate in comfortable silence after that, the lake lapping soft against the shore, and I knew he didn't need her either, not her excuses, not her presence. He'd chosen to stand by me, not because I'd asked, but because he wanted to, and that was the real win. Not some game I'd played against her, but the life we'd built here, piece by piece. The emails kept coming now and then, meaningless little notes I'd skim and delete, but they didn't stir me anymore. The lake house was ours, mine and Luca's, a quiet place where the past didn't echo. I'd sit on the porch some nights, coffee in hand, watching the stars reflect on the water, and feel it. Peace, at last. Not loud, not showy, just there, steady as the house itself. Luca thrived, I kept going, and the world turned on without her. I'd won, not by fighting, but by living, really living, and that was more than enough. The summer sun hung low over the lake, painting the water gold as I sat on the dock, my bare feet dangling just above the surface. It was a warm evening, the kind where the air smells like grass and fish, and the crickets start their song early. Luca was back at the house, tinkering with an old radio he'd found in the shed, said he wanted to fix it up, make it play again. I smiled to myself, thinking how much he was like my granddad, always messing with something broken to give it new life. The lake house had been ours for years now, a steady anchor through all the changes, and I'd gotten used to this quiet, this calm. But today felt different, heavier somehow, like a memory I couldn't shake. I leaned back on my hands, the wood warm under my palms, and let my mind wander. It had been a while since I'd thought about Camilla, not the emails. Those were just noise now, but her, the way she used to be. I remember the early days, when we'd first moved here, her laughing as we unpacked boxes, me chasing her around the kitchen with a wet dish towel. We were young then, broke but happy, or so I'd thought. I tried to pinpoint when it changed, when the little favors for Isabel turned into something bigger, something that swallowed us whole. Maybe it was always there, and I just didn't want to see it. The water lapped at the dock posts, steady and slow, and I shook my head, letting the thought drift away. That was done, buried under fresh paint and new memories. I didn't need to dig it up. A truck engine rumbled in the distance, pulling me out of my head, and I turned to see Luca driving up the dirt path, dust kicking up behind him. He parked by the house, hopped out, and waved me over, holding the radio in one hand. Got it working, he called, grinning wide. I stood up, brushing off my jeans, and walked back, the grass soft under my feet. He set the radio on the porch steps, twisting the dial until a crackly old country song came through, faint but clear. Not bad, huh? He said, proud as anything. I clapped him on the back, laughing. Better than I could have done. Granddad would have loved that. We sat there, listening to the music, the sky turning pink and orange as the sun dipped lower. Luca cracked open a soda, handing me one too, and we talked about his latest project at school, some bridge design he was working on. His eyes lit up, hands moving as he explained the details, and I just listened, soaking it in. This was what mattered now, these moments, him growing into himself, us building something real. The song faded into static, and he fiddled with the dial again, landing on a news station. I wasn't paying much attention until I heard her name, Camilla. My breath caught, just for a second, and Luca glanced at me, noticing. The voice on the radio was talking about a local art show, some charity thing, and there she was, listed as a sponsor with Isabel. They're back in town, the announcer said, cheerful, like it was nothing. Luca turned the volume down, looking at me careful. You okay with that? He asked, his voice low. I took a long sip of my soda, the cold fizz sharp in my throat, and nodded. Yeah, doesn't change anything. And it didn't. They could be 10 miles away or 10 states. It didn't touch us here. Luca relaxed, switching the radio off, and we sat in the quiet again, the lake shimmering in the last light. I didn't feel angry, didn't feel much at all about her anymore. She'd made her choices, and I'd made mine. The peace I'd found wasn't hers to take. Not now, not ever. Lucas stood up, stretching. Gonna grill some burgers. You in? I grinned, getting to my feet. Always. We cooked, ate, laughed, the night settling in soft around us. And I knew this was it, the life I'd fought for, the one I'd won. Not against her, but for us.